We have lots of different kinds of cows that Maya, he's in back there, is the expert on those and many other things. So they go from buffalo size down to little antelope sized cows. Next, please. But in the same deposits that contain the human fossils and the animal fossils, we find a lot of stones that are not modified. They're just natural cobbles. And so one of the big ideas we're working on now is trying to explain how and why those stones were brought to the site and trying to exclude the possibility that they got there naturally. So the story of cobbles is very interesting, and I'll come back to it. Now, among the bones of Dmanisi, almost 20% of them belong to carnivores. Several kinds of cats, hyenas, bears, dogs. The most common one actually, Canis etruscus, a small, very small wolf that is the ancestor to modern wolves and is the ancestor to all domestic dogs. That's the most common carnivore we have at the site. But back in our M5 excavations, we have excavated three, actually there's one under here, actual carnivore dens that the carnivores dug. These are bones from this one. All of the bones in those dens have been heavily chewed. So the carnivores are taking those bones down there perhaps to feed their young. But on the same surface we have lots of stone artifacts. So this means that carnivores and humans were existing off and on, replacing each other at the site in very short time intervals. So they were essentially competing for this location. But the other strong possibility is that the carnivores, the cats in particular, were the hunters. And the humans came in and then took the animals away from them. They let the cats do the killing. The cats don't chew the bones very much, so when the cat is full and sleepy, there's plenty of food there for the humans. So it's very possible, and other people have proposed this idea before, that one of the best ways to survive in this violent world is to let the carnivores do the killing for you, and then you find a way to take the food away from them. So in that sense, notice that in this square we had 45 unmodified stones that had to have been put there by people. There's no geologic way for that to happen. So this is contributing to our study of these cobbles and what they were being used for. But they put them there for some purpose, and we can show clearly with our data that most of those stones were not going to be used to make sharp flakes. They're the wrong kind of stone. So they had to be used for something else. But this situation of having actual carnivore dens in an archaeological site has no precedent in Africa. We know that the carnivores at those sites, but they've never found an actual den, as far as I know, at the site. So Dmanisi shows this very close interaction between carnivores and humans. Next, please. So if we look at the bones from M5, the ones over here in red are the carnivore species. We have bear, a big panther, hyena, and wolf all in that, but they all occur in this one layer here, which interestingly is the only layer of Dmanisi that has produced human fossils. So even that record goes along very nicely with the fact that humans and carnivores were probably meeting face to face at Dmanisi. Next, please. So, I stole some of Maya Buxani's nice slides. And she and Martha Tappan and Dr. Abesalom Bekula have, I think the numbers have actually increased a bit now, but we have well over 10,000 identified bones from Dmanisi, lots of species of animals, and lots of carnivores, but then also lots of food for the carnivores. Next, please. So, two kinds of horses, a big rhinoceros, three kinds of deer going from elk size down to small deer. This is the big elephant. It's a really big elephant. And 7 kinds of cows. So there was lots of food out there in this diverse environment for carnivores to use. Next, please. So here are some of the carnivores. We have two kinds of saber-toothed cats. A big panther like, this is not the panther, but a big panther animal. This is the Etruscan wolf, bear, and two kinds of hyenas. So we also have this really great variety of carnivores at the site. Next, please. So, here's our situation. We have artifacts starting here, and they come up to here. And then in this one layer only, we get human fossils. We get lots of carnivores, and lots of bones of animals that have been eaten, either by carnivores or by humans. So we know that humans with the cut marks and the carnivores with the chew marks, we know what they were eating. But the big question, of course, not only in Indonesia, but all over Africa at the same time, one of the biggest issues is how did humans and carnivores interact? So we have a lot of good data, but in fact we have so much data, it's hard to come to quick conclusions, but it's a very interesting situation to look at human-carnivore interactions. Next, please. Well, this and other people like Mary Steiner, a famous paleontologist at Arizona, led me to stop thinking about chimpanzees as models for what our earliest humans did on a social level, because chimpanzees and gorillas, as you know, they live in groups, they do some things as groups, but they have very little organized social behavior like the wolves. I think wolves make a very interesting model for how early humans got together. Here's a beautiful picture of wolves in Canada chasing a moose, and all the people that study these wolves know that there's an alpha female, usually, that is in charge, and she barks orders, telling some wolves to go faster or where to go. They hunt as an organized group. So wolves have a lot in common with people. They follow a leader, they work together, they take food back to their homes to feed their young. Gorillas and chimps don't do that kind of thing. And so this denning behavior of having a house where you raise your young is characteristic not only of these carnivores, but may have been characteristic of us humans as well. A lot of people have paid attention or asked the question is, why is it that we love our dogs so much? Why is it that we can communicate so readily with dogs? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are social animals, and bonding with their own species, but bonding with humans, comes very easy and naturally to them. So it would not be a surprise that early humans did the same thing, that they bonded with each other, protected each other, nurtured their young, protected them, and with the stone tools, in order to process food, then their group behavior and their technology was more than enough to let them survive in a quite cold environment. Next, please. So that's where the throwing stones come in. Elizabeth Daines is the marvelous French forensic specialist who did this reconstruction, and I was absolutely elated when she put a throwing stone in her hand. And in 2005, National Geographic, you have to be careful what you say to the press sometimes. If you make a casual comment, it ends up in print. And we were talking about throwing stones as a possibility that we hadn't proven yet. And of course, National Geographic jumped right in and said, oh yeah, they were throwing stones all right. But these cobbles literally may be the first weapons in human history. And a friend of mine, Barbara Isaac, wrote an article back in the 80s. She and her husband, Glenn Isaac, worked in East Africa. And a thrown stone is a formidable weapon. And so imagine if there's a cat eating a deer and 10 adult humans come up, each of them holding several rocks. They can drive that cat off of the deer and they get a free lunch. So, but because these stones are not modified, we have to have a lot of good information to try to convince people that that's why they would belong to the site. We're still working on that. But when I look at the size of these people and the ferocious carnivores that they live with, I'm not convinced that just running or climbing in trees is going to be enough. You have to have some advantage in order to survive in that environment. From both an aggressive point of view, to get the food, and from a defensive point of view, to protect the food, or to protect yourself. It makes sense. Next, please. So, in sum, Dmanisi shows long-term use of a single location. That's really unique in this whole time frame. It's a huge site, 20,000 square meters. That's unique in this time frame. It means that they knew that Dmanisi was good for them, that Dmanisi would regularly yield food and other resources that they needed, and so they kept going there again and again. But Dmanisi was also good for other carnivores, and so they kept going there as well. We see variability through time in Dmanisi of their stone technology and the tools that they make. So they could obviously change their activities and their behaviors to meet new situations. We have lots of different associations of artifacts with bones, and that's a big project that's still underway in order to see how the stone tools change when the animals change, to see how they process or procure different animals, etc. And we know very well now that they must have had very complex interaction with carnivores. That interaction may have been essential for them to get food on the one hand, but obviously there were risks involved. So the fact that we had 5 adults or sub-adults, we don't have any children at Dmanisi at all, maybe that means that only the adults were going up there to get food to take someplace else. But we have a lot more work to do to try to figure that out as well. So if we look at the world about 1.8 million years ago, of course our roots were in Africa, but now we know that by at least 1.85 million years ago, people came out of Africa and entered Eurasia. I don't think the Javanese fossils are 1.8 million, but we have things approaching, artifacts approaching that, and a tooth approaching that age in China. So it means that humans were able to very quickly move across the Asian landscape. Vegetarians don't move very fast. It takes them a long time to adapt to different plants and different plant communities. But if you're a carnivore, all you want is meat. You can close your eyes and you don't care if it's pork or beef or fish even. You just need meat. So carnivores have an ability to move very quickly. That's shown in the evolutionary record of carnivores going into Africa and coming back out again, for example, or carnivores like the cats migrating from the old world to the new world even. So carnivores can move very quickly over huge distances. In any event, Dmanisi plays a very central place in looking at human history at this interesting time frame, the very beginnings of our species. So we're still working there. There's a lot more to do. Every day we're excavating now. I took a shower and came down to Tbilisi.